You looking for the soup kitchen? Wrong block, old-timer. The pawn shop kind of laugh that came after it told everybody in the dealership's showroom exactly how they were supposed to feel about the man in the faded barn coat. Augustus Pike didn't know it yet, but the smirk he just wore would cost him the only thing he'd spent 30 years building. His commission, his title, and a whole lot more. 2 hours before that laugh landed, Cornelius Boyd sat in the back of a car he didn't own, watching the Tennessee hills roll past the window of a rented sedan he'd picked up under a name nobody at the lot would recognize. The folder on the seat beside him was thick. Purchase agreements, floor plan financing summaries, a list of 41 dealerships across 6 states, all of them about to fly the same banner, Boyd Automotive Group. The ink on the last signature was 4 days dry. $210 million, the largest single acquisition of his life, and the only thing on his mind was a glass and steel store on the north edge of Knoxville called Sterling Motors. His attorney had called it a formality. Walk the lots, meet the regional people Friday, shake hands for the cameras. Cornelius told her to push everything back. She'd worked for him 11 years, and she still asked why, even though she already knew. Because a spreadsheet won't tell me how they treat a man who looks like he can't afford to be there, he said. And that's the only number I actually care about. He'd grown up 40 minutes from that showroom. His father had pumped gas and fixed transmissions at a station that no longer existed, and Cornelius could still remember being 9 years old, standing in a dealership exactly like Sterling while a salesman talked over his daddy's head, called him Chief, and steered him toward the oldest car on the lot like it was the only thing a man like him deserved. His father had bought it anyway because he needed the wheels, and he'd driven it home in silence. And Cornelius had watched his jaw work the whole way and never forgot it. So when he pulled the rented sedan into a visitor space at Sterling Motors that Tuesday afternoon, he wasn't wearing the watch. He wasn't wearing the suit. He had on a barn coat with a torn cuff, work pants gone soft at the knees, and a pair of boots that had actually seen a job site. A ball cap, no logo, pulled low. He looked like a man who might be there to ask about a trade-in on something with 200,000 miles on it. The showroom was beautiful. He'd give them that. Polished concrete floors that threw back the light, a row of new trucks lined up like soldiers, a coffee bar in the corner with a chrome machine hissing steam, glass everywhere. The kind of place built to make you feel either welcome or unwelcome, depending entirely on who decided which. A young woman at the reception desk looked up first. Her name plate said a daisy, and she had the careful, watchful eyes of somebody who'd learned to read a room early. She started to smile and say something kind. She didn't get the chance. You looking for the soup kitchen? Augustus Pike came around the side of a display truck with a coffee in one hand and a smirk already loaded. Top salesman, 14 years, a plaque on the wall by the service door to prove it. He had the build of a man who'd played a little ball in high school and never let anybody forget it, and a voice that carried because he liked it to. Wrong block, old-timer. We don't do layaway on charity here. A couple by the sedan section glanced over. The husband almost said something. His wife touched his arm. Don't. They went back to pretending to read a window sticker. Cornelius set his eyes on Pike, calm, unhurried. I'm here about a truck. That one. He nodded at a silver 3/4 ton near the front glass, the most expensive thing on the floor. Pike laughed again, this time loud enough that the finance manager looked up from his glass office. That one, sure you are. He took a slow sip of his coffee. Tell you what, why don't you let me save us both some time? That truck runs about 92 out the door. You got $92,000, partner? I asked to see it, and I asked if you can afford it. Pike set his coffee on the hood of a brand new sedan, which was a thing he'd have written somebody up for, and crossed his arms. I've been doing this 14 years. I can spot a tire kicker before he clears the door. You want my honest advice? There's a buy here, pay here, 2 exits down. They'll get you into something. Won't be pretty, but it'll roll. A daze stood up from her desk. Mr. Pike, I can help him if you're— Sit down, Addie. He didn't even look at her. I got this. She sat. But she didn't look away, and Cornelius noticed that. He noticed everything. The way the young man wiping down a fender across the floor had gone still. The way the finance manager in the glass office had turned back to his screen a little too fast. The way the older couple by the sedans wouldn't meet anybody's eyes. What's your name? Cornelius asked. His voice hadn't risen a single degree. Excuse me, your name, first and last. Pike grinned, tapped the plaque-shaped name tag pinned to his lapel. Augustus Pike, #1 salesman in the state, 3 years running. And I'll still be #1 long after you wander on back to wherever you came from. He spread his hands, performing now, because a small audience had gathered. Look, I'll make it real simple. Show me a pre-approval, show me a bank statement, show me anything that says you're not wasting my afternoon, and I'll personally hand you the keys to test drive that truck. Otherwise, he flicked 2 fingers toward the door. The parking lot's that way. What Augustus Pike did not know, what no spreadsheet in that finance office could have told him, was that the man in the torn barn coat had built his first dealership out of a 2-bay garage with a hand-painted sign, had been turned down by 9 banks before the 10th said yes, and had spent 30 years learning to read people across exactly this kind of floor. Cornelius Boyd had been underestimated by better men than Augustus Pike. He had simply outlasted all of them. He reached into the inside pocket of the barn coat. Pike tensed, just slightly, the way men like him always did. But Cornelius only pulled out a folded sheet of paper and set it on the hood of the sedan, next to Pike's cooling coffee. "What's this?" Pike said. "You said show you something." Cornelius kept his hand flat on the page. "Open it when you're ready." Pike snorted and didn't touch it. "I don't open homework, Chief. I close deals." He picked his coffee back up. "A daze. Get the man a glass of water and call him a ride. We're done here." And that, the narrator would tell you, was the moment Augustus Pike chose his future. Not when he laughed. Not when he pointed at the door. Right there, when a folded piece of paper sat 8 inches from his hand, and his pride wouldn't let his fingers reach for it. Some men are undone by what they do. Pike was undone by what he refused to even look at. Cornelius left the paper where it was. He walked, slow and deliberate, across the polished floor to the silver truck, and he ran one hand along the bed rail the way a man does when he actually knows what he's touching. Pike followed, irritated now because the show was getting away from him. "Sir, you can't. 3/4 ton. 6.2 diesel." Cornelius opened the driver's door without asking. "Tau package, leather, the bigger screen." He looked at the sticker hanging from the mirror. "You're marking it $4 grand over what the store 2 exits down has the same trim listed at. You know that. Or you just hoping nobody walks in who's done their reading?" For the first time, Augustus Pike's smirk slipped, just a hair, because that wasn't tire kicker talk. That was somebody who knew the business. But 14 years of being the loudest man on every floor he'd ever stood on snapped the smirk right back into place. "Step out of the vehicle." His voice dropped, hardened. "Now. Before I call somebody to walk you out, call them," Cornelius said, and shut the door gently and leaned against it. "While you're at it, get me your general manager. My GM doesn't come down for window shoppers. He'll come down for me." Something in the way he said it. Flat, certain, no heat in it at all. It was the voice of a man who had never once in his adult life had to ask twice. Adacy felt it from across the room. The young man with the rag felt it. Even the finance manager in the glass office stood up halfway out of his chair before he caught himself. Augustus Pike felt it too, and it scared him somewhere underneath the bluster, in the part of him that knew. But fear in a man like Pike doesn't turn into caution. It turns into cruelty. He walked back to the sedan, picked up the folded paper Cornelius had left on the hood, and held it up between 2 fingers. "This your bank statement, old-timer? Your big secret?" He raised his voice for the room. "Let's all see what the big spender's working with. Mr. Pike." A daze was on her feet again. "Please don't." He tore it. Not all the way. He ripped the folded sheet halfway down the seam, a long, ugly sound in a quiet showroom, and then he opened his hand and let both halves flutter to the polished floor at Cornelius Boyd's feet. "There's your paperwork." Pike's voice filled the whole room now, the way a man's voice does when he thinks he's already won. "Pick it up and get out of my store. You want to play big man? Go do it where they don't know better." He looked Cornelius dead in the eye, and what came out of his mouth next was the thing that would follow him for the rest of his life. "Go on, bend down and get it, boy. That's about your speed." The word landed like a dropped wrench. Adaze's hand went to her mouth. The young man with the rag took a step forward and stopped himself, his jaw tight, his job sitting on his shoulders like a hand pushing him back down. The older couple by the sedans finally moved, but only to gather their things and head for the exit, the husband muttering something, the wife not looking back. And the worst part, the part Cornelius would remember longest, was the man in the suit near the coffee bar who looked at the torn paper on the floor and then looked at Cornelius and shook his head. "Not at Pike." at the man standing still while a salesman called him a boy. Like Cornelius was the one making everyone uncomfortable just by existing in that room. Cornelius Boyd looked down at the two halves of the paper on the floor. He could see his own reflection in the polished concrete, stretched long and broken at the seam where the floor panels met. He looked at the torn page. He looked at Augustus Pike's shoes, expensive loafers, tapping an impatient rhythm, and he did not bend down. He took out his phone instead, unlocked it, found a name, held it to his ear. "Who you calling?" Pike said, and there was the first real thread of worry in it. "Cops won't do nothing. You're trespassing the second I say so." The call connected. Cornelius said 5 words, quiet and even, like he was reading a grocery list. "Sterling Motors. Come now. Please." He hung up. Pike laughed, but it cracked at the edge. "Who was that, your ride?" "My regional director," Cornelius said. "Her name's Margaret Sloan. You've met her. She signs off on your numbers every quarter." He slid the phone back into the barn coat. "She was 40 minutes out. I'd guess she's doing it in 25. The name did something to Pike's face. He knew Margaret Sloan. Everybody at Sterling knew Margaret Sloan. And there was no version of the world Augustus Pike understood where a man in a torn barn coat said her first name like that, like they'd had dinner, like he could summon her to the floor with a phone call. "You don't know Margaret Sloan," he said, but it came out smaller than he meant it to. Cornelius didn't answer. He walked slow to one of the customer chairs near the finance office, pulled it out, and sat down. He folded his hands. He had the patient, settled stillness of a man who had waited out far worse than Augustus Pike and had all the time in the world. "Get up," Pike said. He didn't. "I said this is private property and I'm asking you to leave. Then call your police." Cornelius looked up at him, and for the first time there was something underneath the calm, something old and tired and absolutely unmoved. "Call your GM. Call whoever you want. I'll be right here when they come." And Augustus Pike, who had never in 14 years stood on a showroom floor and not known exactly where the power was, felt the floor begin to tilt under his polished loafers. He looked at a daze who would not meet his eyes. He looked at the finance manager, who had suddenly found a reason to be on the phone. He looked at the young man with the rag, who was looking right back at him now, and not with fear. 26 minutes later, a charcoal SUV pulled hard into the front lot, nosed crooked across 2 visitor spaces, and stopped. A woman got out before the engine fully died. Mid-50s, steel gray blazer, glasses shoved up into her hair, moving fast. The glass front doors swept open, and Margaret Sloan came through them like weather. Pike straightened his tie. He knew this part, or thought he did. A customer complaint, escalated, embarrassing but survivable. He'd survived a dozen of them. He'd learned the dance from the old district manager, Harlan Voss, who'd taught him that the trick was to look concerned, blame the customer's attitude, and let it blow over. He stepped forward with his best wounded professional face. "Margaret, hey, listen, I'm glad you're here. We had a situation with her." She walked straight past him, didn't slow, didn't glance, walked past Augustus Pike like he was a display stand, her eyes locked on the man in the torn barn coat rising slowly from the customer chair, and the whole showroom watched her face change from hard, fast, in control to something none of them had ever seen on Margaret Sloan. Something close to fear. Miss, she said it clear, loud enough to reach the coffee bar, the finance office, the service door. "I am so sorry. I came as fast as I could." The name moved across the floor like a cold draft. A Daisy's hand froze on her keyboard. The finance manager came fully out of his glass office now, slow, like a man walking into deep water. Augustus Pike's mouth was still half open from the sentence he never got to finish. "Mister." His voice did something it hadn't done since he was a much younger man. It shook. Who's Boyd?" Margaret Sloan turned around, and the look on her face could have stripped paint. "Augustus, this is Cornelius Boyd, founder and chief executive of Boyd Automotive Group." She let it sit there a beat, watched it travel. "He is the new owner of this dealership, of all 41 of them. The purchase closed Friday." The room did not gasp. It went dead. The steam machine at the coffee bar hissed into a silence, so total you could hear the cooling tick of the SUV's engine out front through the glass. Augustus Pike looked at Cornelius. He looked at the barn coat, the torn cuff, the work boots, the ball cap he was now holding in one hand. He looked at the face of the man he'd told to go find a soup kitchen, the man he'd called a tire kicker, the man he'd told to bend down and pick paper off the floor like a boy, and something behind his eyes simply came apart. "No," he said. "No, he came in here looking like." He stopped. There was nowhere for that sentence to go that wasn't a confession. Cornelius bent down. Slow, the way a man bends when his knees have carried 58 years across a lot of hard floors. He picked up the two torn halves of the paper. He fitted them together, careful, and laid them flat on the hood of the sedan where Pike's cold coffee still sat. The letterhead was clean and black across the top. Boyd Automotive Group. Below it, the acquisition summary. 41 stores, the addresses, and at the bottom, in blue ink, his own signature. "This is what you tore up," Cornelius said. He wasn't loud. He had not been loud one single time. "I came in here today to find out how my people treat a man who looks like he's got nothing, because that tells me everything the books can't." He looked at the torn seam running through his own name. "Now I know." Margaret had her phone out already, thumbing through contacts, her jaw set in the particular way of a woman calculating exactly how much damage was on the way. Legal, HR, corporate communications, Augustus. She didn't look up from the screen. "Did you call this man a boy and tell him to pick paper up off the floor?" Pike's eyes went around the room, hunting for a friend. The finance manager studied his shoes. The older couple was long gone. Adaze was looking right at him, and there were tears standing in her eyes, but her chin was up. Across the floor, the young man with the rag had set it down on a fender and was watching with both hands at his sides, and the look on his face was not sympathy. "It was a misunderstanding," Pike said. "He came in dressed like I didn't know who. That's the problem." Cornelius cut it off, gentle, final, a door easing shut. "If you'd known who I was, you'd have smiled. Pulled the chair out. Called me, sir, brought me coffee, handed me the keys before I asked. He took a step closer. And the next black man who walked in here in a torn coat, you'd have done all of this to him instead and made sure no camera was running." He held Pike's eyes. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry it was me." There was nothing for Pike to say to that. There was nothing anyone could have said to that. The words just hung in the showroom air, and a young man by the service door quietly lowered the phone he'd been recording with for the last 6 minutes. "You're suspended effective right now," Margaret said. "Pending a full review. You'll surrender your badge, your demo keys, and your floor credentials before you leave the building." Margaret, 14 years. Pike's voice climbed, cracked. 14 years I've been #1 in this, Bedge. Keys. Now. He stood there a long moment with the whole room watching, and then his hands, the same hands that had torn the paper, went to his lapel and unpinned the name tag. Augustus Pike, Senior Sales Consultant. He looked at it. 14 years of being the loudest man in the building distilled down to a little plastic rectangle. He set it on the sedan hood next to the taped-together page that bore the name of the man who now owned everything he stood on. Cornelius turned away from him then, like the matter was already finished, and looked at Adaze, who was wiping her face with the back of her wrist. "You stood up," he said. His voice came down soft for the first time all afternoon. "Twice, when nobody else in this room would. I want you to remember you did that." She nodded. She couldn't get a word out, but she held his eyes, and there was something in the room that hadn't been there an hour before, when the laughter started, something steadier. Cornelius looked across at the young man by the service door, the one who'd set down his rag, the one who'd hesitated when his whole job told him to stay small. "What's your name, son?" "Deshawn. Deshawn, sir. You wanted to step in. I saw it." Cornelius nodded slow. "You didn't, and I understand why a man holds his tongue when his rent's riding on it, but I want you to sit with how it felt to stand still. That feeling's worth more than any speech I could give you. Hold on to it." Deshawn swallowed and nodded. "Yes, sir." The video was online before Augustus Pike's truck cleared the parking lot. The young man by the service door, 22 years old, a parts apprentice 3 months into the job, had filmed the last 6 minutes of it on his phone from behind a display vehicle. He didn't caption it with anything clever. He didn't need to. He posted it that night with 5 words. "This happened in my store." By the time the lot opened the next morning, it had 2 million views. The anger came first, the way it always does. People tagged the dealership, they tagged the local news, they tagged civil rights groups and consumer advocates, and anybody with a blue check who might amplify it. Then came the clips, the worst seconds cut into loops that traveled faster than the whole video ever could. Pike tearing the paper, Pike saying, "Boy," Pike pointing at the floor. And then someone, nobody was ever sure who, attached 3 words to it that turned a viral clip into a movement. "Pick it up." By the weekend, it was a hashtag, and under it, thousands of people, black men and women from every corner of the country, started telling their own versions. The dealership that wouldn't hand them keys. The jewelry counter that followed them aisle to aisle. The bank that asked for a second ID. Each story different. Each story exactly the same. A reporter named Yolanda Pruitt was the one who turned a bad afternoon into a reckoning. She covered consumer affairs for the NBC affiliate in Knoxville, and she'd seen the clip like everyone else. But unlike everyone else, she started pulling threads. She filed records requests with the state. She tracked down 3 former Sterling employees who'd quit in the last 2 years, and what she found went a long way past one salesman and one torn page. There had been complaints. 4 of them filed over 5 years, every one from a black customer, everyone alleging that Augustus Pike had steered them, stalled them, or run them off the lot. Every one of them had landed on the desk of the district manager, a man named Harlan Voss, the same Harlan Voss who'd taught Pike the dance. And every one of them had quietly died there. One was marked resolved with no record of anyone ever calling the customer back. One had been closed the same week it was opened. 2 had simply vanished from the system until Pruitt's records request pulled them, half deleted, off a server backup the company had forgotten it kept. Harlan Voss and Augustus Pike golfed together every other Saturday. Their wives were in the same book club. When Pruitt put the whole thing on the 11 o'clock news, receipts and timestamps and a recovered email from Voss to Pike that read only handled, "Don't sweat it," the story stopped being about one cruel man on one bad day. It became about a machine that had been built, quietly, deliberately, to make sure men like Cornelius Boyd's father drove home in silence and never got a call back. Boyd Automotive Group put out a statement within hours of the broadcast, and it had Cornelius's fingerprints all over it. What happened at Sterling Motors was not one man's failure. It was the predictable result of a system designed to bury complaints and the people making them. That system is finished as of today. Augustus Pike was terminated for cause that afternoon. Not quietly, not with a handshake and a severance check. His letter named gross misconduct and discriminatory conduct and a violation of the harassment policy he'd signed every year and never once read. Harlan Voss was placed under review the same day and gone inside 2 weeks, his name printed in Pruitt's follow-up beside his own deleted emails. The state attorney general's office opened a civil rights inquiry. The 4 original complainants were found, re-interviewed, and made whole through a settlement whose terms stayed private, but which Pruitt reported reflected not just the harm, but the years of being ignored on top of it. Sterling Motors closed for 9 days. When it opened again, there was a new general manager, a new district structure that didn't root a single complaint through anyone it was about, and a policy built from the ground up. Anonymous reporting straight to an outside board. Real bias and de-escalation training, not a slideshow on a Tuesday, but a 12-week program run by people from outside the company who had no reason to look away, and bolted to the brick by the front doors at eye level where every customer and every salesman would pass it coming in, a small steel plate. Every person who walks through this door deserves to be treated like they belong here. If you are treated as less, call this number, and under it a direct line, not to the manager, not to the district office, but to the outside board that no Harlan Voss could ever bury. As for Augustus Pike, the clip outlived everything he'd built. He deleted his accounts inside 2 days and it didn't matter, because the internet had already kept its copy. He didn't go to prison. This was never that kind of story. But the 14 years, the plaque by the service door, the #1 banner he'd worn like a crown, the floor he'd ruled by being the loudest man on it, all of it was gone. Not because he'd insulted a man with money. Because the one man who finally had the power to stop it had walked through the door looking like nobody at all. 7 weeks later, Cornelius Boyd pulled the same rented sedan into the same visitor space at Sterling Motors, late on a Tuesday afternoon, the light going gold across the new trucks lined up in the glass. Same barn coat, same boots, same cap, no logo. He pushed through the front doors and a chime he didn't remember sounded softly overhead. That was new. A young man behind the welcome desk looked up with an easy, unguarded smile. "Afternoon. Welcome to Sterling. Anybody helping you yet? Just looking, thank you. Take all the time you need. Coffee's fresh if you want it. No second look at the coat, no glance at the boots, no tightening behind the eyes, just a man welcomed into a room. Across the floor, at a desk that hadn't been hers 7 weeks ago, a daze looked up. The plate on her desk read differently now. Adeze Nwosu, sales manager. She saw him, and her face did something complicated, surprise and memory and a warmth she didn't bother to hide, and she came around the desk. "Mr. Boyd, how's the floor?" he asked. "Good." She let out a breath that had a small laugh in it. "Really good. The training people thought it was going to be corporate noise. It wasn't. The outside folks, they actually listen. Deshawn's in the sales program now. He's going to be better at this than any of us. And the number on the wall by the door? 3 calls the first month." She paused. "All handled in a week. Nobody buried anything. Nobody got golfed away." Cornelius nodded and looked out at the floor, fuller than it had been. A family circling a truck with 2 kids climbing in and out of the bed. A young couple at a desk signing something while Deshawn pointed at a line on the page and grinned. The room had an ease to it that no spreadsheet would ever capture. The particular calm of a place where people walked in expecting to be treated like they belonged. He didn't buy a truck. He never meant to. He stood a while longer than he needed to, and then he tipped his cap to Adeze, and he walked back out into the gold light. By the front doors, bolted to the brick at eye level, the little steel plate caught the sun. He stopped. He ran one thumb across the raised letters, the way you touch a thing to make sure it's real. Then he got into a car nobody at the lot would look at twice, and he drove off down a road his father had once driven home in silence. So here's the question, and be honest, because nobody's grading you but yourself. If you'd been standing in that showroom with your phone in your hand, watching a man get told to bend down and pick paper off the floor like a boy, would you have stepped forward? Or would you have found a window sticker to read? Sit with that one a minute. Because the answer to it says more about who we are than any story ever could.